All right, welcome to our webinar on building your base through creating a communication strategy and best practices. We are doing this webinar as part of our Bike Walk Everytown series. Bike Walk Everytown is our suburban advocacy training program for the Chicagoland region. And this webinar is, of course, open to anyone interested in improving biking, walking, or transit in their community. Just so you know, for those of you on the webinar who are on the live webinar, there's a little comment. If you're viewing the webinar, there's a comment button in the lower left-hand corner, which you can click to ask a question, and we'll address questions at the end of the webinar. If you are calling in or are unable to see the webinar live right now, you can email me with any questions you might have, and my email is Maggie, M-A-G-G-I-E, at activetrans.org. So feel free to ask any questions you may have. So we are recording this webinar, just so you know. So in case you're missing part of it or not able to be here today, you'll get a chance to watch it later. So first of all, we're from the Active Transportation Alliance. We're a nonprofit based in Chicago. We serve the Chicagoland region, and our mission is to advocate for walking, biking, and public transit to create healthy, sustainable, equitable communities. And this webinar is thanks to two of our sponsors, UIC and REI, so thank you to them. And now let's get started. So I want to introduce our speaker, Ted Villar. He is our communications director here at Active Trans. He is the author of 6 outdoor recreational guidebooks, and you can check them out on his website, tedvillar.com. Like one example is 60 hikes within 60 miles of Chicago, or best trails in Illinois to bike in or hike in. So check out his website. Ted has professional experience as a newspaper editor for multiple publications, and he has a master's in writing from DePaul University. So I will hand this over to Ted now.
Hello. Hello. Oh, boy.
Hello there. Hi there. Thank you, Maggie, for that introduction. Sorry for the delay. I had my my machine on mute. So thanks everyone for joining us. Really glad to have you all here. And as Maggie mentioned, my background is kind of on both sides of the equation. I've worked in nonprofit communications for about 17 years, and then I've also worked as a newspaper reporter and a newspaper editor, writing for magazines and other publications, so I kind of have a viewpoint that goes on both sides of this communications process. And I'm really excited to talk about this topic with you folks today. There's a lot to talk about when you're talking about getting the word out about your campaigns and your projects. And one of the great things that a lot of these strategies are either free or very close to being free. Since there's a lot to know, we can't go into a huge amount of detail for each one of these topics, but a few of the things that I hope you'll come away with are just knowing the value of effective communications in your campaigns. And I'm hoping that you'll have some basic ideas on how to craft your message so that it gets heard by the audiences that you hope to connect with. I also am hoping that you'll gather some tips and tactics for getting your messages out via traditional media or via social media too. So, why should communications be high on your priority list? One of the first reasons is that free media publicity is a great way to raise awareness about the work that you do. It's much cheaper than advertising, and it's important to keep in mind that you have a foot in the door with the media because you're working to create a better world, and therefore news reporters, news editors are more interested in what you have to say. Another reason to really think about these strategies is that, as you probably know, the world of social media is playing a larger and larger role in our culture, and it looks like that role is just getting larger as time passes. You want to execute good communications because the decision makers that you're trying to reach, they pay attention to social media. They read newspapers, they watch TV, and they listen to the radio. And this is your opportunity to make sure that they understand your project or your campaign, and this is your opportunity to reach all those audiences out there that you want to make aware of the work that you're doing. So I want to start with creating a campaign message, and this is a really important part of the process because this is how you connect with people, and this will enhance your visibility if you do it well, help with fundraising, allow you to reach influential people, and help you recruit more supporters. So careful attention to crafting your message allows you more control of the generally unpredictable publicity process. There's a lot of things that you can't control when you are covered by the news media, but one thing that you can control is what you're telling them about your campaign, about your group, about your project. And you're more likely to get people to act when you think hard about how your issue is meaningful to them. It's the difference between saying a new bike lane is good for local residents, and, for example, the new bike lane will allow adults and kids to be safer while biking between the west side of town and the local business district. You want to be very direct and make sure you explain what the benefits are of the project that you're working on. And so let's jump into how do we put this message together? What do you want to say? And the best messages are clear, simple, direct, and emotional. I would urge you not to get bogged down in details that seem so important to us, but instead you want to just go to the heart of the issue. In that example that I just gave, talk about how this particular stretch of road will be more safe for people biking and walking. Talk about accessibility issues. And you want to think about what are 2 or 3 points that you want the person to learn or remember. You don't want to go over 20 points, for example. And another strategy in crafting your message is to try it out. Test it on people who aren't familiar with the issues that you're addressing. Do they get it? Are they sold on it? If they're not, you want to try it again. And to me, this is a really important part of the process, is to come up with a draft version, share it with people, get some feedback, and then try to refine it, try to improve it, and again, share it. And this can be a back and forth that might happen a number of times, but it always, in my experience, has the effect of improving the clarity and the directness of what you're trying to say. And it's good to keep in mind that when you're putting together a message, it's not a slogan or a campaign theme. It's information to get people to act. And another important point is you want to be consistent with that message. It's important to use the same ideas when you're interviewed by a news reporter. If you have a blog, in your blog. If you have an e-newsletter, use it in your e-newsletter, and that consistency will have a powerful impact. If you're kind of taking a different angle in each of those different types of communications, you won't be as clear in speaking to your audience. So consistency is a really good thing to keep in mind. Another sad but true thing is that bad news often garners more attention than good news. People pay more attention to what is threatening. And of course, you don't want to make your entire message bad news or negative, but it's helpful to include some elements of that in what you're talking about. You want to avoid jargon. Don't use terms that people may be unfamiliar with. You want to think about making a rational appeal, say to make a roadway more safe, as well as an emotional appeal, say, for example, to create a better place to live. You want to tell stories, brief stories. People are moved by stories, and the emotion behind them more often gets them to act as opposed to, say, just stats and raw data. Another really important thing to keep in mind as you're putting together your campaign messaging is to know your audience. You want to address the interests of the audience. What do they get out of this? What do they need to hear? What's in it for them? What do they know and what do they not know about this particular issue? And be as specific as possible when you're asking them to do something. And the next section, I'm going to talk about what can be the core of your message, and that's sometimes referred to as an elevator pitch. And it's a short, persuasive statement used to spark interest in your audience. And like I said, it can be used in a number of different ways, but this core message, you want it to be brief, 20 or 30 seconds long, and you want to keep it consistent. And here's a number of questions that you can ask yourself as you're putting together this elevator pitch. Again, who is your audience? What is your goal? What problem are you trying to address? What is your personal motivation? Why should your audience care? Excuse me, what needs will be fulfilled? How do you want your audience to feel? What action do you want your audience to take? There was an organization that came up with a formula for the most successful elevator pitch, and they said that the most successful elevator pitch is 27 words, 9 seconds long if you're delivering it verbally, and it makes 3 different points. So that's going to be the core of your message, and then you need some supporting messaging to go along with that, and we often call those the talking points. And the talking points can be a few paragraphs, can be a full page, a page and a half. You want to keep it brief though, and you want to keep it to the point. And here are some things that you want to cover in the talking points. Provide an introduction. Sometimes that can be in the form of a question. Questions often get people kind of engaged. Address the problem, address the solution, and then what is the action that you would like people to take. So that's, in a nutshell, how to craft a good message for your campaign. And now I'm going to talk about where you want to get that message delivered to. And first I'm going to talk about traditional media. And while social media has been taking a larger and larger role in our culture, traditional media still matters a great deal, and it's still a really important way to get your message out there. So in the world of traditional media, there are local newspapers and news websites, and for the purpose of this discussion, I'm going to include bloggers in this category too. And then there's TV and radio. And in the realm of local newspapers and news websites, these are your best bets for good coverage. Despite a lot of cuts in recent years in the newspaper business, they still cover communities unlike any other medium. And they're most likely to give your issues the attention that they deserve. And one important thing with local newspapers and news websites, it provides an opportunity to cultivate relationships with reporters and editors, unlike other mediums. So, for example, at Active Trans, we've made a concerted effort over the years to have a good relationship with the transportation reporter at the Chicago Tribune, and it's really paid off. But that's just an example of how you want to keep in touch with these people. With local newspapers, a good way to share your message through them is with a letter to the editor, and I'll go through that process in a minute very quickly. Another thing about local newspapers and news websites, they often kind of set the stage for a lot of the coverage that happens on TV and radio. TV and radio do some original news reporting, but most often they generate stories from topics that appear in newspapers, and it's a good thing to keep that in mind. If you are working with TV and radio, or if you really want to target them, you keep in mind that the catchy sound bites are the ones that win the day, and you really have to make sure that you're crafting a message that is very condensed. TV coverage is great because it reaches so many people, but it's often only several seconds long, and honestly, it can be pretty superficial when it addresses a lot of the issues that are important to us. So what are some of the good ways of getting in touch with the traditional media? One of the strategies that is most common is issuing a news release, and you don't have to be a formal organization to write and send out a news release. It can be a single person, it can be a small group, or all just people gathered around a particular project. Very quickly, a news release, you want to include the who, what, where, when, and how in the first few paragraphs, and then provide some quotes from people in your group, and then some background information to kind of tie it all together. You want to include your elevator pitch and some of your key messaging. You want to include a contact person and some background about your cause or your organization. And you can send out a news release in advance of an event, when launching a campaign, or just anything that you think is particularly newsworthy. And toward the end of my presentation, I'm going to go through a list of suggestions for news stories that you can pitch to your local media that will help spread the word about the work that you're doing in your community. And then if you want to see some examples of news releases, you can just go to the Active Trans website, which is activetrans.org, and in the top right of the home page there is the word media, and click on that, and we have quite a few news releases, and feel free to use that format and the structure that we use in those, and just reading through some of those examples might be helpful for you as well. So the next way to get your message heard in the traditional news media is an example that I mentioned earlier, which is a letter to the editor. It's typically printed in a newspaper, on a website. These are often written as a direct response to recent coverage in the newspaper, and it often kind of builds on the article, and often the letter to the editor will make the point that the person writing the letter, their perspective or the perspective of their group was not properly addressed in that article. So this gives you an opportunity to say, hey, what about this? This was not covered in the article, and that's often the format that is used. With a letter to the editor, you want to respond very quickly. It's a good idea to read the letters in your local newspaper, particularly the one that you want to target, to get an idea of the length and the style and how they're typically handled in the paper. You want to keep it concise. Most venues have a maximum word count of just a few hundred words. That means just a few paragraphs and a few sentences in each paragraph. So it's very brief. And most newspapers will have guidelines on their website about where to send it, length, and other pertinent details. So some general rules of thumb that I offer when you're working with traditional media is you want to make it easy for them to do their job, and you want to make it easy for them to contact you. So if you have a website, make sure you have contact information on your website, or if you have a Facebook page, make sure the contact information is in your news release. You want to be a resource for the news reporters, and you can do this. Consider providing a fact sheet or background information or other resources. Maybe there's some larger national discussion of the issues that you're addressing at the local level, and you'd like to share an article about that with your reporter so that they just have a larger context. Think about how your story will play visually. You can offer photos, suggest to them photos that might go with the story. Take a look at your local news sources and think about what's newsworthy in your campaign. I often do this as I'm reading the paper. Think about what angle is used here. Think about how our content can fit in this particular newspaper. And you, of course, when you're sending a news release or dealing with news reporters, you want to use your messaging always. The news reporters are typically on a tight deadline, so be ready to respond quickly. And know which reporters are covering your issues and cultivate a relationship with them. As I mentioned, with us and the transportation reporter at the Chicago Tribune, the suburban outlets that I've that I've worked with in the past that you may want to consider sending news releases to or pitching story ideas is at the Daily Herald. We've worked with Marnie Pike quite a bit. She's the transportation reporter there. And then we've also worked with the College of DuPage radio station, WDCB. They cover our issues every so often. And then the Pioneer Press papers. And I'm sure there's a whole lot more, but those are just a few that I have worked with over the years. So a few tips when you're doing a media interview. A good idea is to appoint a spokesperson and have them practice interviewing. You want to anticipate tough questions and practice the answers. Just getting back a moment here to the spokesperson question, it's a good idea to have someone who is very familiar with a lot of the issues that you're dealing with, and that the media can call back upon if they have follow-up questions. And then I really want to emphasize the idea of having them practice. The more that you can, ask this person tough questions and have them respond and use your messaging effectively, the better they'll do as your spokesperson. So I really want to emphasize just practicing beforehand. So I mentioned anticipating tough questions. You shouldn't be caught off guard. You should try to anticipate anything that might come up. And sometimes the hardest question is, how can I help? So you want to know how to respond to a full spectrum of questions that might come up. So that's a quick thumbnail sketch of getting your word out in the traditional news media. And now I want to talk about spreading the word about the work that you do in social media and digital communications. As far as social media goes, my experience is extensive in Facebook and Twitter and a little bit of Instagram. So most of what I'm going to talk about is how to use Facebook and Twitter to share the information that you want to get out. And we found that Facebook and Twitter are both great for recruiting supporters and generating interest in the work that we do. The idea is to share information and to get people to share your information and to spread your message to a wider audience. And generating more followers. And I'm sure a lot of you already use these social media platforms, so I apologize if I'm covering information that you already know, but a fair number of people haven't used these platforms as a way to talk about campaigns and projects, so it might be helpful for them too. So using social media, it takes time, but it's well worth the effort. And if you're having a tough time learning, enlist a coach. I've done that myself here at Active Trans, where some of the staff have more knowledge about certain facets of social media than I do, and I've asked them to help me out. So those people are out there, and I'm sure they're glad to help you if you ask, or if you are willing to buy them a sandwich. We use social media in a variety of ways here at Active Trans. We use it to highlight our campaigns, to publicize our events, to share articles of interest to our audience. One thing that is interesting to note that up until recently, when people learned about a new product, a new company, or some organization online, they did typically a Google search. And then just a few years ago, it changed so that when people learn about new products or companies or organizations online now, they learn about it through social media, and it's good to keep that in mind. The landscape has kind of shifted from searching for things to kind of having them appear in your social media feed. Excuse me. One thing I want to mention really quickly that a lot of you have probably already used, but I want to make sure that we cover it, is a tool in Facebook called Facebook Events, and it's a great way to publicize events. You can create an event, you can invite people to it, they can RSVP, you can send them reminders about it. There's a conversations that people can have about the event. It's great. Of course, it's important to keep in mind that not everybody uses Facebook, and I'll get into that in a minute. But it's a great tool for the people that do use Facebook. So when you're using social media, the way that you communicate with people is through posts. And I want to talk quickly about how to create a good post. I encourage people to use posts that incorporate images and photos. And if you look at the Active Trans Twitter and Facebook feeds, we use images with almost every post, and it is very apparent to me that those get shared more as a result of having an image. A good way to use photos in your posts is if you had an event and you took some photos at the event. Share those pictures on your Twitter platform. A good post keeps the text brief. You don't want to lose your readers. Their attention span is very short in this context. Don't post too frequently or too infrequently. If you post too much, people will think that their feed is getting cluttered. If you post too infrequently, people will think that your organization is no longer in operation. So you have to find a balance there. And my advice as far as frequency is at least a couple times a week. I mean, if you go a couple weeks without it, it's not the end of the world, but you're losing people as you go longer without posting. Excuse me. It's good to think of these social media platforms as conversations. You can ask questions and you can respond to people. You can share information with them. They can share information with you. It's just good to think of it as a venue to do some back and forth with people. And the more that they interact with you, the more they will appreciate you. And then my advice is don't just talk about your group or your project on social media. Share related information that followers may find interesting. Maybe it's a news story that is pertinent to the project that you're working on. Maybe it's a photo. Maybe it's an anecdote. Lots of possibilities there. And then this is an important point that I'm an evangelist about, and that is I recommend that you use social media only if you are committed to regularly updating your accounts. This takes time, and you want to make sure that you or someone else can commit some time each week to what is needed to posting. And it doesn't have to be posting a lot, but it doesn't look good when a social media account is inactive. It looks like your group no longer exists. And so think carefully before you open up that new social media account. Maybe it's you want to wait until you have more people who can help carry the burden. Here at Active Trans, we have probably about 5 or 6 different staff people who contribute to our social media accounts, and that's a lot of people, but it takes the burden off 1 or 2 people. You certainly can do it with 1 or 2 people, but it's nice to kind of share the burden. So social media can be really powerful and effective, but it's important to keep in mind that it's never a replacement for more traditional approaches to marketing and communications, getting back up to the importance of staying connected with the traditional media. And now getting into some other types of digital communications, I want to talk about a website and e-newsletters. And in my experience, smaller groups might be just fine using Facebook and not having their own website. But a website will allow more flexibility. And one thing about a website is that it encourages people to link to your material. They're more likely to do that if your material is on a website rather than a Facebook page. And of course, another element of this discussion is that there are a fair number of people who don't use Facebook, and those are the people that you're more likely to connect with if you have a website. So if you are at the point where you think a website might be a good idea for your group, there are some free options out there, and one of them is Wix, another one is Weebly. I don't know a lot about them, but I know that there are some free possibilities. And one way that people use websites a lot in their work at the grassroots level is to provide a calendar, provide a blog, great kind of interactive ways to engage people. And if you're hosting a blog on your website, it's a great way to promote events, to have people sign up for your email list or link to a petition. And then blogging on your website, as with social media, it doesn't always have to be about your group, about your campaigns. You might want to share information from a news article that is not directly related to the work that you do. So then the next type of important digital communication to consider is an e-newsletter, and this doesn't have to be very elaborate either, and I'm sure a lot of you have already been collecting email addresses from supporters at events or on your website if you have one. And once you have a list of 40 or 50 people, you probably don't want to keep sending it through your personal email account, and instead you want to look at possibilities like MailChimp or Google Group or Yahoo Group. Those all have free versions available. And if you are sending out an email, it's a great opportunity to communicate regularly with your supporters. Maybe you'll want to send out quarterly, or maybe you just want to send it when you have enough news to include in an e-newsletter. And this is also an area where you can get in touch with Active Trans, and we can connect you with some of the supporters who live in your community. So feel free to get in touch with Active Trans, and we can help connect you with those people who you might include in an e-newsletter list. Keep the design simple, keep the text brief, use images. An e-newsletter, like a blog, it's a great place to promote an event, request an action, and if you have an e-newsletter, you want to make it easy for people to sign up for it on your blog, on your website, on your Facebook page. So the last section of my presentation, I want to talk about some ideas for generating interest in the media about the work that you're doing. News outlets love it when local groups send in ideas for coverage. And they use these story ideas frequently, but you have to provide them with some good ideas. And here are some ideas for story pitches or news releases that can help you generate coverage of your communities. And the first one is something we see all the time, that's lists. They love lists. 5 benefits of kids biking and walking to school. 7 ways trails improve a community, and the list goes on. That's an easy one, and you just need to flesh those out for the news reporter, and they just might bite. Another common way to generate interest in your project is to comment on other news events. If someone was injured in a crosswalk, use it to talk about the need for safer walking infrastructure. That's just one example. But there are other news stories out there all the time, and it's okay to send an email or a news release to a reporter and say, I'm responding to this article, and here's our pitch. Do a survey. There are free tools like SurveyMonkey, which is at surveymonkey.com, that will allow you to poll people, and they're free. And the results of that poll can be used for a news story. So just think of questions that relate to the work that you do. Here's the number of people that said they want a new trail in their community, and here's some more of their thoughts. It takes a little time to gather all that information together, but news outlets love that stuff, especially if you're able to generate, 7,500 or more responses. One strategy that we use a lot here at Active Trans are reports and report cards. A lot of organizations use these to generate media interest, and we issue several reports each year. In the past couple of years, we've issued one on suburban bikeways, on speeding up Chicago buses, on dangerous intersections for people walking. There are a number of others, but your reports don't have to be long and involved. They can be just a couple of pages, and a report card can be pretty simple too, like how is the walking infrastructure in your downtown area, and you could enlist some professional planners to help you come up with that. The news media loves that sort of stuff. I advise people to take advantage of events, holidays, observances, maybe on Bike to School Day, there's an opportunity for a story pitch. A new trail is opening, a local bicycle race even, and you can tie your project to that event and ask your news reporters to cover it. And of course, then there's the age-old strategy of holding events and inviting local personalities to attend. If you have a bicycle ride fundraiser, invite the mayor of your town. Even better, have him or her speak before the event and talk about your project. That's a great way to not only generate excitement among the people who are at the event, but it very likely will be covered by the news media and give more attention to your particular project that the fundraising is aimed at. And then with all of these ideas, if you're not able to get a news reporter to follow up on one of these are great topics that you can use on your blog or use in social media. And they don't have to be long, a few paragraphs, a page. And then one last venue for getting your word out there is doing a guest blog post, and a few different venues for this. One is thepatch.com. I know the Tribune, their local newspapers at one time offered local groups offered a venue for local groups to send in their stories and they would publish them. I'm not sure if they're still doing that. I haven't seen it lately, but it's worth checking into. There's an organization called Go Green Illinois in the North Burbs that you might be able to post a guest blog post on their blog with, and you can write a guest blog post for Active Trans. If you want some exposure for your project, get in touch with me. My email is ted@activetrans.org, and I'll be glad to talk you through that process. And it can be a pretty brief post, and we can share it on social media and help generate more exposure for the work that you do. So I just have a few final thoughts as we wrap up here, and thank you for staying with me. I tried to rush through a lot of material very quickly, and I'm happy to respond to individual questions that you might have. Feel free to email me. My telephone number is on our website. But as we wrap up here, I just want to offer a few final suggestions, and one is I urge you to commit to being proactive. Don't just wait for people in the media to call you. Start cultivating those relationships, and it will inevitably pay off. Same thing with posting on social media. Start doing it. And it really will pay off. And then one thing I like to emphasize is people get involved in the issues of biking and walking because one of the reasons they do is because they love doing it. And I urge you to try and show that enthusiasm that people have for those modes of transportation as you're talking about your project and as you're trying to get more people to support the work that you do. People think of these activities as fun, and you should try to harness some of that enthusiasm and share it. And then a final thought is if you have a group and it doesn't have a name, be sure to give yourself a name, and you can use the bike walk words before your town's name, or you can come up with another name for your group, but that'll help with coverage. It'll help when people are talking about the work that you do. And the final point that I'd like to make is that Active Trans is here to help you. I'd be glad to guide you through some of these strategies in more specific ways. Just get in touch and I'll help as much as I can. So thank you again for everyone participating here. I think we're going to take some questions.
Yeah. So this is Maggie again. I just wanted to briefly mention some resources that we have. We've got on the Bike Walk Everytown page, we have a one-pager on communication tips. We have actually a worksheet on how to put together an elevator pitch. So I would encourage you, if you'd like to put together a pitch, going through that worksheet and definitely spending some time on it to get something that you that you're happy with. Then there's a PDF here. It's a really great resource on media advocacy and speaking to the media. I will send that out to everyone who registered for this webinar. Thanks, Jeff, for that question. And then Ted had a few books here as well that he recommends, and we'll be putting this PowerPoint online as well, so you can access this slide and all the slides. And I think so if anyone has any questions, please, use the little comment bubble and let us know. But I think one person, so I actually added in a slide that I didn't tell Ted about. So I just want to go back to that one slide and sorry, I think it was slide 14. It was just about some tips about actually delivering your message in front of an audience, and just some quick tips of the importance of being yourself, having fun. It's an opportunity to share something that you really care about with people in your community. So if you can frame it like that, it makes it a little less stressful. And it's important to be accurate when you're talking about, the message you're trying to get across. But as Ted was mentioning, it's a good idea to let go of some of the details and not focus so much on all of the 20 points you need to make, but really think about the top 2 or 3 points that will give people the message without overwhelming them. And, speaking with conviction, this is something you care about, and people can sense that when you're speaking. And then also, again, keep it brief. No need to give people a lecture or a seminar. So just wanted to go over that slide real quick. And Ted, I had a question for you. It was on this. It was on letters to the editor. How many words would you say is appropriate? Because in this slide we have 2,400 words as a max, which maybe is way too much.
Yeah, that is not correct. Typically, it's just a few hundred words. An op-ed is something different. Yeah, and those can be longer, and those are usually more like 600 or 700 words, and those are something a little more advanced, and that's where you're writing an opinion piece for the newspaper, and you work out the subject matter and the length with the editor beforehand, and newspapers often pay for those. It's more of a more of a complicated strategy, so I didn't include that, but the regular letter to the editor is just a few hundred words. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. So I guess if no one has any other questions, we can wrap this up. Oh wait, I did want to go to the final slide. 1 minute. Give you a few more minutes to ask more questions if you have any. Oh, actually, we do have another question. It is, any suggestions on how to develop relationships with media? I often receive no response from media contacts.
Yeah, that's a common problem. And reporters are often rushed, and that happens to me as well, where I'll send a pitch and I just don't get a response. And the advice that I would give is keep trying, and keep thinking about newsworthy subjects. You might try to get in touch with them through different channels. Maybe their email box is super full always, and you just don't have a chance of getting through via email. Maybe try a phone call. Maybe try their editor. I've done that a number of times with some successful results. Try some other people within the organization that you think might have some overlap with the topic that you'd like them to address. But keep trying. Just look for different avenues to get in there, and don't keep sending the same ideas, generate new ideas, and eventually something will stick. And having worked as a newspaper reporter, I know that they're overburdened a lot of the time, and especially now where they're also expected to, blog and do social media and take their own photos when, those weren't part of their job description 10 or 15, 20 years ago. So they're busy people, and you just want to keep trying. Keep trying.
Great, thanks, Ted. Another question: how about how to find the other contacts?
Well, I can help you with that. And we have access to a database of Chicagoland media organizations, and I can do a search for you based on your geographic location and see what comes up. Sometimes I'm able to find news the venues that I hadn't heard of or hadn't thought of as a result of a search like that. So, but also ask around, ask your neighbors what they, if there are some local media outlets that they use that you haven't heard about. Yeah. So there's a few ways to approach that, but I'll be happy to help with that process too.
Great. Thanks. And you can see Ted's email address up there, ted@activetrans.org. And you can always contact me as well, Maggie@activetrans.org. And just to get it in your heads, our next webinar is going to be March 21st, so a little less than a month, and we're going to talk about, again, building your base, but through outreach strategies. So one of those would be writing a petition, and we're going to actually speak to someone from the suburbs about his experience getting over 1,000 signatures on a petition. And we're going to have Jim Merrill from Active Trans, our advocacy director, is going to be leading that webinar. So I guess if there are no other questions, we'll close this out, and we'll get this webinar on YouTube. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll be back next month. Okay.
Great. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.